In this video, I'll cover the for loop. Start out with the flowchart, then I'll go over the syntax, and finally I give a few examples. Let's start out with the flowchart. The flowchart looks a little bit different than the while loop or do loop. The while loop and do loop have a condition and a code block with statements that execute when that condition is true. Now for the for loop here, we have two separate parts. We have the init parts and an update part. When the for loop is encountered, it first executes the statements in the init part. And this is typically to declare variables that are used as part of the loop. This could be a counter variable, for example, to execute something 10 times, and we need a variable to keep track of the number of iterations that the loop has executed. Now, so this is executed first. After the init statement, the condition is checked. If the condition is true, it will execute the statements in the code block. If the condition is false, it continues the program after the loop. Now let's assume the condition is true. The statements in the code block are executed. After the code block, the update part is executed. This is typically used to update variables that were declared as part of the init part. After the update section, it will go back, check the condition again. If it's true, execute the statements in the code block and go back to the update statement. So let's take a look at the syntax. So for the syntax, we have the for keyword, we have open close parentheses, and a code block. This looks similar like a while loop for now, except that the keyword changes. Now what's different is that we have the 3 sections here, and these sections are separated by a semicolon. First, there's the init section. After the init section is the condition. And then the last section here is the update section. And then inside the code block here are the statements we want to execute it. So this is the code block. Now there's a specific order in which these execute. First is the init statement, right? That's the first part that the loop will execute. After that, it will go to the condition. So we'll execute and evaluate the condition. If this is true, then step 3, it will execute the statements in the code block. And at the end of the code block, it will go step 4, which is the update statement. After the update statement, it will go back to step 2 and check the condition again. Then if it's true, goes back, execute the statements step 3, and then go step 4, step 2, step 3. So this goes counterclockwise as long as the condition is true. If the condition is false, it will stop the loop and continue the program after the loop. Now let's take a look at an example. Let's say we want to output the values between 1 through 10. So we use a for keyword, then in the init section declare a new variable, int I equals 1, because we want to start with 1. Then I use a condition I less than or equal 10. So basically I want to output I starting with 1 until it reaches 10. If I is larger than 10, I want to stop. And then in the update section here, I increment I by 1. So this gives me the values from 1, incremented by 1 in each iteration until I reach 10. And 10 would be the last one. Then it would be incremented to 11 and the loop would stop. In each iteration, I can then define what I want to do. In this case, I want to output I and just output I. Now let's do this in a single line, so we keep the output concise, and here I just add a space in between. And I add a line break at the end. So let's run this program. There's no output. Oh, it's coming. Here it is. So it started at 1, right? So the program ran, it encountered the for loop, declared and initialized a new variable I to 1. So that's the first step here. Then it checked the condition, is 1 less or equal to 10? This is true. So it goes, executes the code block, simply outputting 1 and a space. Then it went to the update statement, I++. So I is now 2. Then it checks again, is 2 less or equal than 10? This is true. It outputs 2 and a space. So it added here 2 and the space. Then it went to the update statement. It added 1 to 2, which is 3. Then checks if 3 is less or equal to 10. This is true. It outputs 3 and a space right here. It goes back to I++. So now 3 becomes 4. Is 4 less or equal to 10? This is true. It outputs now 4 and a space. And then it goes, increments 4 by 1, which is 5. And so it keeps doing this until I is, let's say, 9. So it is 9. 9 is less or equal to 10, so it outputs 9 and the space here. It increments I by 1, which is 10. 10 is still less or equal to 10, so it's equal to 10 to be exact. It outputs I, 10, and a space. Then it increments 10 by 1, which is 11. And now this condition, is 11 less or equal to 10, becomes false. And it stops right there, outputs the line break at the end, and continues the program. Let's do one more example. Let's say we want to output values from 25 down to 5. And not every value, let's say we want to output every other value between 25 to 5. So that would mean 25, 23, 21 until we reach 5. So how would we write this for loop? We have the for keyword, and the first thing we have to think about, what is the first value we want to start with? We want to start with 25 in this case. So I do int I equals 25. I is the typical variable for a for loop. So whenever you see a for loop, most of the time you will see I. The next part is the condition. When do we want our program to continue? In this case, I mentioned it should be at least 5 or above. So I should be larger or equal to 5. And the next part, what are the steps we want to take at each iteration? So previously, I wanted to update by 1 by 1 by 1. In this example, I wanted to output every other value. So that means we don't want to update by 1, but instead by 2. And also, we are counting down, right? We are not going up from 5 to 25. Instead, we're going down from 25 down to 5. So we need to decrement I, and not just decrement by 1, but subtract 2 from it. So I minus 2. I use the compound operator here. So this subtracts 2 after each iteration of the loop. And inside the loop, this stays the same. I just output I and a space. And then after the loop, I add a line break. Now let's add another line here so we have a blank line in between those two loops that we can see it better. Let's run this program. So here we can see this is the first loop, this is the second loop. We started with 25 and a space. So this initialized I to 25, it checked is 25 larger than 5, this is true. Then it outputted 25 and a space. It went to the update statement and then subtracted 2 from 25. This is 23. It checks is 23 larger or equal to 5. This is true. So it outputs 23 and a space. goes back here and subtracts 2 from 23. We have 21. And so it continues subtracting 2, checking if it's larger than 5, and then outputting I, up until the point where we have 7. So 7, we subtract 2 from it. This is 5 now. 5 is still larger or equal to 5. So it enters the code block one more time. It executes the output statement, outputs 5 and a space. Oops. And then subtracts 2 from it. This will be 3. And then 3 is no longer larger or equal to 5. This is false. And then continues the program, adds a line break, and then we already reached the end of the program. Now you can also add multiple variables. So you could have something I equals 3, j equals 5, for example. So these are comma separated. And then you could have logical conditions, for example, I must be larger or equal to 10, and j must be larger or less than or equal to 25, for example. And then when you want to perform multiple updates, you could say I++, for example, and then use a comma to perform another update. I plus equal 5, for example. So if you want to have multiple variables, you separate the initialization here with a comma and the update statement with a comma here as well. The condition, you would then use one of the logical operators, and or. Most of the time, almost always, you can get away with just a single variable. But just be aware that if you wanted to use multiple variables, you can using the comma, and you can update multiple variables using a comma. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.